Hey guys, Disciplined Magic here, and it's time for another huge MTG mistake, and I say huge because I can almost guarantee every single person who plays Magic has come across this at some point. This has got to be in the top 10 most commonly asked questions to a judge at Friday Night Magic, at least that I've seen. I am, of course, talking about cards that refer to themselves by name, and then specifically do something with it. In general, the unofficial ruling is basically cards that refer to themselves by name, their exact card title word for word, only refer to themselves, the individual instance of that permanent. I happen to know that there are a couple exceptions, but for simplicity, I'm going to just stick with this one problem. That problem is, well, for example, Bomat Courier. Since that card is standard legal, it's a perfect example. So it is a 1/1 artifact creature for 1 with haste, which is already totally awesome. And whenever it attacks, exile the top card of your library face down. You cannot look at it. Then all you have to do is pay 1 red, discard your hand, sacrifice Bomat Courier, which there's the name reference, and put all cards exiled with Bomat Courier, there's the second name reference, into their owner's hands. So let's start at the beginning. You attack with Bomat Courier and you exile the top card of your library face down. So that is sitting in the exile zone, preferably in a pile that indicates it came from Bomat. Otherwise, you're going to have a darn good memory. It doesn't say isolate this from the other cards in your exile zone, but you kind of do have to do that. So those cards are just simply sitting in exile. It's the same as if they got exiled, except that they're face down. So Bomat Courier gets blocked, he gets destroyed. Well, those cards just sit there in exile. They just remain in exile. Nothing happens. They don't go to your graveyard. They don't, go back into your library. They just sit in exile. So then you summon a second Bomat Courier. It's a completely different physical card. You bring them out onto the battlefield, and then you attack with them. So now you exile another card. And okay, now there's another card that was exiled by Bomat Courier. So then you go to use the ability, you discard your hand, sacrifice Bomat Courier, then put all cards exiled with Bomat Courier into basically your hand. Do you then include the cards that are sitting in exile from the first Bomat Courier? Because it says put all cards exiled with Bomat Courier into their owner's hands, and that was the name of the previous permanent, the previous card. It seems like yes, and everybody usually plays it incorrectly as yes, but the answer is actually no. When a card refers to itself by name, it refers to the exact version of it, the individual one. So you could say it's Bomat Courier number 1. Well then, Bomat Courier number 1 referencing its own name is referencing Bomat Courier number 1. If you bring out another one, it's Bomat Courier number 2. So you would have to keep separate exile piles so that you know which one was basically exiled with which Bomat. Now that particular problem is really easy to picture in your head because you could have 2 Bomat Couriers on the field at the time, and you'd think, oh, well, what if I sacrifice one? Do I get all the cards? Obviously not, because there's just 2. It doesn't say put all cards exiled with a Bomat Courier into their owner's hands, so obviously when they're both on the field, I have to keep 2 piles and I'd only get about half the cards. When one of them dies or is, replaced or you cast a different one, then it gets more complicated though. Actually, it's exactly as complicated. It just gets more confusing. Now, this one gets people. You might not have put 2 and 2 together because I did actually make a video about this. If you flicker something or return it to hand and recast it, it is the same physical card, but it's considered a different permanent. So you could have a Bomat Courier sitting out on the battlefield and then use Essence Flux or whatever, which says exile it, then immediately return it. It left the battlefield, it came back, it is now a new permanent. It is not the same permanent. So, since it refers to itself by name, it not only refers to the same card, like physical card, but it refers to the same permanent. So if you flicker it, it's considered a different permanent, and all cards that were previously exiled with it would not get included in the ability. There's 2 more really important rulings I might as well mention. It has nothing to do with the video, though. But Bomat Courier, if he gets blown up, destroyed, whatever, you do not get to flip the cards up that are face down in exile. They have to stay face down until the end of the game. Speaking of the end of the game, rule number 2 is anything that is face down must be revealed directly to your opponent before you shuffle and start the next game. So if there are face down cards in exile, you must flip them up in full view of your opponent and make sure that they acknowledge and see them. That rule was infinitely more important with morph creatures, and I believe that's where the ruling originated from, was the original version of morph. So to all the douchebags at my old local gaming store that would say, I don't have to flip this up, I'm not going to tell you what morph it was. If you want to know what morph it is, wait till next game. And I tell them, it's an actual rule of the game. You have to show me what card that is. So little fun fact for you there. But let's get off of Bomat Courier and go on to two other examples that are phrased slightly differently but work exactly the same way. Let's move on to the always hated Ashiok. God, do I hate her. Ashiok is the card that I actually first learned the rule about, and the judge had to go look up the ruling online. The first ability of Ashiok says +2, exile the top 3 cards of target opponent's library. And I'm actually not sure if Ashiok's a female or not. I thought I remembered that she was. I don't know. We're going with she. Whatever. Already said it. So she, or whatever, has a -X that says put a creature card with converted mana cost X, exiled with Ashiok Nightmare Weaver, there's the name reference, onto the battlefield under your control. That creature is a nightmare in addition to its other types. And then her -10 is crap and nobody ever used it. So here's the question. If Ashiok gets bounced back to hand and then recast, or if Ashiok gets replaced by another Ashiok with the legendary rule, or if Ashiok gets killed and then you summon a different Ashiok, can you draw from the same pile? No, obviously not. It's almost the exact same thing as Bomat. When it says you have to do it with a creature card that was exiled with Ashiok Nightmare Weaver, that's when it says, okay, that permanent, that instance of the permanent, that's it. So if Ashiok gets destroyed, those cards just remain in exile. Oh, and about 10 people playing this stupid Ashiok deck back in the day at my old local gaming store really did not like hearing that, you couldn't resume using the cards from the past Ashiok. They wouldn't believe me. Every single time it turned into a fight. Every single time we called over one of the judges who were all clueless. We got about 50%, oh yeah, you can use them, and 50%, oh no, you can't use them. And then once the judge rules, what are you going to do? I mean, those people were just such idiots. So besides Ashiok, let's move on to the most complicated one I've ever seen, which is Godsend, and this is just because it was phrased a little bit differently. This is one of my favorite artifacts of all time. I love it. By the way, fun fact, it is considered a white permanent. Who knew? White is in the casting cost, it's white. Okay, but see, here's the thing. That doesn't work for Eldrazi. In fact, I think I could think of a couple other exceptions, but basically they probably should have put the white color indicator like right in the middle there. They did that for flip cards. I just assumed all artifacts were colorless and the border's colorless, but no, apparently it's a white permanent. So fun fact of the day number 3. So yeah, Godsend is pretty much the worst thing ever to play against. So equipped creature gets +3/+3 for 3. I mean, that's insane. That's why they made it double white, because you really didn't want to play this in a 3-color deck. Totally unfair. Whenever equipped creature blocks or becomes blocked by one or more creatures, you may exile one of those creatures immediately before resolving combat. If you want to actually kill the creature that's holding Godsend, you basically have to block with a bare minimum of 2 creatures, because one of the 2 is getting exiled. Only one of them, though. That's another fun ruling about this card. Oh, and if the creature equipped with Godsend blocks at all, ever, whatever they're blocking becomes exiled. So they can't really attack you for the entire rest of the game, unless they're flooding you. Here's where it gets bad, though. Opponents can't cast cards with the same name as cards exiled with Godsend. So there's the reference to the name. That reference, of course, means this one instance of Godsend, not any ones cast in the future or the past or any of that. But you might think this must be a persistent effect, because it says opponents can't cast cards with the same name as cards exiled with Godsend. It doesn't say while this is in play. Unfortunately, it does mean while it's in play. Whenever it's listed as a property on the card, which I don't think it's called a property, I think it's called like a static ability or something like that. But basically, when it's listed on the card, it's assumed that that does not affect anything unless the card is actually in play, unless it says otherwise. So it sounds like, as long as a Godsend is in play, or as long as a card called Godsend is in play, then it's still in effect, but that's just not how it works. Basically, if you exile 3 cards with Godsend, 3 different creatures, and now they got a handful of creatures that they can't cast because all 3 of them are blocked, then somebody manages to blow up Godsend. They can now cast them. If you want to reblock the cards again, well then, unfortunately, you're going to have to cast another Godsend and either become blocked by or block the creature that you want exiled. Oh my gosh, do I love this card though, because it's better than Shimmy Inspector and like Infinite Obliteration, because it doesn't go into their library and get rid of the cards, it leaves them there and just says that they can't cast them. So you better hope that Godsend doesn't leave the field, because then you're in trouble, but I mean, it's an artifact that doesn't happen that often, especially in that block. But you still allow them to draw dead, so you can have one creature blocked, like Farika's Chosen, and now they pull a Farika's Chosen off the top of their deck. Oops, they basically just missed their draw step because that card is useless. It cannot do anything. I mean, you could like discard it or, like something weird, but you can't actually cast it. Now, with effects that go get every single version from the graveyard, the hand, and the library and get rid of every card named blah, well, now they can't draw it. I mean, yeah, it's removed from game forever and they're never getting it back, but they could still draw something in its place that's even better, theoretically. So I really like Godsend, or as the people at my old LGS started to call it after I put it into every deck I owned, the Dick Sword. Of course, I just called them the Dick Net Deckers. Oh, by the way, for you Commander players already, got the hamsters running on the wheel in your head. Sorry, if you take a land card, like an island that has Awaken, or somehow became a creature till end of turn, and then you block it with a Godsended creature, they can still play lands because they're playing them, not casting them. Somehow they actually had to put that as a ruling. That's already a rule in the game, but they do that a lot. In fact, the actual ruling pertinent to what I was saying is if Godsend leaves the battlefield and later another Godsend enters the battlefield, it is a new object, and I think they meant to say permanent, and then in parentheses, even if the two were represented by the same card, end parenthesis, the new Godsend won't stop opponents from casting cards with the same name as cards exiled with the first one. So what they're saying is get a Godsend destroyed or have it bounce back to hand, which that's why they're saying represented by the same card. Either case, you are no longer jamming those spells. So overall, it's pretty simple. I mean, just whenever a card references itself by name, it means the exact instance that's on the field now, and that's that. Any other replays with the same name are not considered the same card. It will not take part in the ability that's referencing the name. So hopefully you guys can go correct a lot of people playing Bomat, and I'll see you next video.